during my time in placement, I went to a school called Aikenbar Primary School, which is in Dumbarton. I stay in Clydebank, which is round about here, and so Dumbarton's just up the road, so it's about 20 minutes, which means I got a nice long line. I'm normally up for 6 o'clock for uni, but I managed to get a long line until about 7 o'clock, so it's in Bellsmire. Bellsmire is quite a rough area, and it's got quite a lot of deprivation. It's a regeneration area, so it's actually there's quite a lot of lottery funding going into the area just now. So there's a lot of high flats getting knocked down, new housing estates getting built, and the school is smack bang in the middle of this. So Bellsmire is just this area right here. I also work for West Dumbartonshire Council, which is where Dumbarton's found. So I'm actually in and around the area. So Clydebank, where I stay, Dumbarton, all the way up to Balloch, which is quite close to Loch Lomond. So I'm in and around the schools and get to see the sort of different levels that the different types of kids in the different areas. I don't really work as much in Bellsmire. I normally stay down to where it is that I stay in Clydebank. Bellsmire, I had a lot of preconceived ideas before going into the school. A lot of the guys had given some horror stories of the kids maybe running amok. But when I went in, I was actually pleasantly surprised, because the kids are actually, the younger kids especially, were all brilliant. I think around about that age, when you're talking between the age of 5 and the age of 7, kids are normally exactly the same. They're all new, they're all fresh into school, they're all excited about being in school. It's when you get to the later years that you started finding that there was maybe some learning difficulties, or the kids were not performing as well as they could have, they were getting distracted. Maybe that's problems at home. When I was reading through some of the notes that we had, some of the guided readings that we had already, found a quote like this, and it sort of showed that, as I said, it wasn't the majority of the time the kids weren't a hassle, but it was apparent that there was some difficulties there. So I went on to look at what strengths I had, and I found that my non-verbal skills were probably the best. As I said, I work for West Dumbartonshire Council, that's in the sports development team. So I'm a sports coach, and I'm in working with ranging from primary 1s all the way up to primary 7s. So I feel that coaching is very similar to teaching. We're standing in front of a group of people, and we've got to make sure that we're being quite animated. We've got to over-exaggerate everything, make sure that they're staying engaged. So an example of this would be when I'm standing in front of a group of kids. One of the sports that I do, athletics. So one of the aspects of that is throwing a javelin. So when we're in a big hall, we use little foam javelins for the younger kids. So I've got to stand in front of them, and I've got to make sure that they're watching my every single movement, so they're holding the javelin, and if they're right-handed, we've got to make sure that their left foot's pointing forward. They've got to aim for it. They've got to make sure that they're twisting it, and they're pulling through the whole way through, and making sure they're throwing it. So they've got their eyes on me at all times. I've got to make sure that everything that I do, all my body movements, are exactly the way they should be, because they're going to copy this. Their oral skills, or maybe their written communication is not going to be as good, but they're constantly watching, they're observing all the time, and that's how they learn. So my teaching performance, I feel that my strengths are that I make sure that eye contact's always there. I'm always looking to see that they're looking at me. If they're not looking at me, they're obviously looking at someone else, or they're fighting with each other. If there's a big hall and you're trying to get all the kids together, they're crawling over the top of each other. And if they're not looking at you, they're obviously not paying attention to what it is that we've got to have. Body language as well. Body language, I would say, not only the message that I'm trying to get across, I'm trying to stay positive, trying to keep them engaged. I'm also wanting them to look at my actual body movements, what I'm actually doing. So I don't know if you've noticed, but my hands go about when I'm talking. I think that sort of keeps them, if there's things moving about, they're like, oh, what's that? It's like a cat, the ball, they're following after it. Gestures as well, that's another thing. I think it's similar in the classroom. A lot of gestures. If you're keeping yourself big, if you're keeping yourself open to them, then they'll be engaged by it. Found this quote quite like this: 2/3 of communication is through non-verbal communication. Now this is good, and I like that. That made me feel good. I feel that I get my point across quite well when I'm standing up here waving my hands about. But if my verbal communication is not up to a certain standard, then the non-verbal communication is just completely useless. So that's where I feel that an area that I could develop is actually speaking in front of people. So specifically when I'm dealing with younger kids, so that's primary 1s to primary 3s. Earlier on I was talking about they're brand new into school. This is a whole new learning experience for them, so they don't have the academic ability just yet. That's what we've got to teach them. when you're dealing with the older kids, they've got a basic understanding, so when you speak to them, they can understand what you're saying. You know, you could put, you can go through a technique, so be that throwing a javelin or going through a maths problem, they'll be able to understand what it is that you're saying. With the younger kids, they might not understand it as well, so you've got to make sure that you're being audible, you know, people can hear you. So my main issues, I feel, is my pace. At this point, I'm going to take a wee drink and I'm going to try and slow down, because that's when I stop making any sense. So my pace, we do speak too fast in Glasgow. Glaswegians are notorious for speaking too fast, and I feel that I do this as well. Another problem that I have is syntax, which we have looked at, making up my sentence. So because I'm speaking too fast, I'm getting myself confused, so my sentences tend not to make any sense. So it could be, one example I had when I was in placement was that the primary threes were learning about subtraction, so we looked at that as well. So they had the unit blocks and they had the 10 blocks, and we've got to talk about exchanging the tens for a unit. It's all about consistency. It's all about making sure that we are using the same words every single time, so that they can make sense of this. I don't do that because I'm speaking so fast, I'm confusing myself. I start using words like exchange, take away, subtraction. It's not the same thing every single time. So I need to make sure that I'm trying to do that. Also interpreting the pupils themselves. That would be, the kids have no, they can't conceptualise yet. They have difficulty understanding things. So we've got to make sure, we've got to be that point where we can explain to them what's going on. So if they don't understand what they're talking about, I feel I don't really understand what they're talking about, and I need to get used to that. I need to start dealing with them a wee bit more. Apologies.
Cables, slightly.
So the strategies I thought I could use to try and develop my development needs are as follows. Maybe video and audio recording, as we're doing just now. I think that's one of the most vital ways that you can do it. It's the same with coaching, it's the same with teaching. So presentations like this, I think over the next 4 years we're going to be standing up in front of people quite a lot. We're going to be standing ourselves. I think that's I think it's good, because we will be in front of a class. We need to make sure that we're comfortable standing up here. So maybe video recording, audio recording the presentation, so that we can watch it back and then we can pick out any bits that we've got to try and improve. Assignments and reports, we'll be doing a lot of them, so maybe even just sitting, recording your own voice, reading through it could be an essay, say on Room, that we looked at before. We could do an essay on that and then read it back to ourselves, then listen to it. Just reading a bit of reading, making sure that you're enunciating every single word, that you're audible, that you can actually understand the point that you're trying to get across. Another place that I could do the recordings is in a class, a coaching class. So if we're standing in front of a class for an hour, trying to see if the learning outcomes have been achieved, to make if they've understood everything that I've said. Even if we're not recording them, there's always two of us at a coaching class, so my co-worker could be basically just standing behind me watching the whole time, and then at the end of the class they could say to me, right, you need to make sure that you're speaking a bit slower, calm yourself down a wee bit, or make sure that you're explaining everything better, you're being more consistent. Another thing that I could do was just ask my boss, could I get classes aimed at younger children? So doing a basketball class for 5-year-olds, working with them on a sort of regular basis, maybe a weekly basis, and getting myself used to their craziness and getting myself used to that. This is just a wee final piece. This is me at one of my classes. Occasionally we'll be thrown in the middle of a sport that we don't feel too comfortable with. This is a dance circle here, and this is a group of, these kids are a wee bit older, they're about primary 6 I think, and this is just after I had done a very awful chicken dance type thing in the middle of the circle, and that's Jenny, one of the girls I work with, who was laughing at me. So feeling a bit embarrassed there, a wee bit like I'm standing in front of you guys, but I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much for listening.